So when I was in art school, I developed a shake in my hand, and this was the straightest line I could draw. Now, in hindsight, the shake was great for some things, like mixing a can of paint or shaking a Polaroid. But for me, this was really doomsday. This was the destruction of my dream of becoming an artist. The shake developed out of a single-minded pursuit of pointillism, just years of making little tiny dots. And eventually, these dots went from being perfectly round to looking more like tadpoles because of the shake. So to compensate, I'd hold the pen tighter, and this progressively made the shake worse, so I'd hold the pen tighter still. And this really became a vicious cycle that ended up causing so much pain and joint issues, I had trouble holding anything. And after spending years perfecting dots, I couldn't imagine being an artist in any other way. So I left art school, and then I left art completely. But after a few years, I just couldn't stay away from art, and I decided to go to a neurologist about the shake, and was quickly diagnosed with permanent nerve damage. And the neurologist took one look at my little squiggly line I drew for him and said, "Why don't you just embrace the shake?" Okay, so I did. I went home and I grabbed a pencil and just started letting my hand shake, and I started making all these scribble pictures. And even though it wasn't the kind of art that I was ultimately passionate about, it felt great. And more importantly, once I embraced the shake, I realized I could still make art. I just had to find a different approach to making the art that I wanted. Now, I still enjoyed the fragmentation of pointillism. So I began looking for other ways to fragment images where the shake wouldn't affect the work, like dipping my feet in paint and walking on a canvas. Or in a 3D structure consisting of 2x4s, creating a 2D image by burning it with a blowtorch. I discovered that if I worked on a larger scale and with bigger materials, my hand wouldn't really hurt. I went from having a single approach to art to an approach to creativity that just completely changed my artistic horizons. This was the first time I'd encountered the idea that embracing a limitation could actually drive creativity. At this point, I was finishing up school, and I was so excited to finally get a real job and afford new art supplies because, well, frankly, I had a pretty pathetic set of art supply tools and stuff, and I felt that I could do so much more with the supplies that I thought an artist was supposed to have. And so I got out of school, I got a job, I got a paycheck, I got myself to the art store, and I just went nuts buying supplies. And then when I got home, I sat down and I set myself to task to really try to create something just completely outside of the box. But I sat there for hours, and nothing came to mind. Same thing the next day, and the next, quickly slipping into a creative slump. I was in a dark place for a long time, unable to create. And it didn't even make any sense because here I was, finally able to support my art, and yet I was creatively blank. But as I searched around in the darkness, I realized that I was paralyzed by all these choices that I never had before. And it was then that I thought back to this limitation of my jittery hand. Embrace the shake. And I realized if I ever wanted my creativity back, I had to quit trying so hard to think outside of the box and get back into it. I wondered, could you become more creative by actually looking for limitations? What if I could only create with $1 worth of supplies? At the time, I was spending a lot of my evenings in Starbucks, and I'm sure I still do, and I know that you can always ask for an extra cup if you want one, so I decided to ask for 50. Why not, right? And surprisingly, they just handed them right over, and with some pencils I already had, I made this project for only 80 cents. This became a moment of clarification for me, that we need to first be limited in order to become limitless. I took this approach of thinking inside the box to my canvas and wondered, what if instead of painting on a canvas, I could only paint on my chest? So I painted 30 images, one layer at a time, one on top of another, with each picture representing an influence in my life. Or what if instead of painting with a brush, I could only paint with karate chops? And I actually hit the wall so hard that I bruised a joint in my pinky and it was stuck straight for a couple weeks. Or what if instead of relying on myself, I relied on other people to create the content for the art? So for 6 days, I lived in front of a webcam, slept on the floor, ate takeout, and asked people to call me and share a story about a life-changing moment. Their stories became the art as I wrote them onto this giant revolving canvas. Or what if instead of making art to display, like we always do, I destroyed it? This destruction idea turned into a year-long project that I called Goodbye Art, where the idea was that each and every piece of art had to be destroyed after its creation. In the beginning of Goodbye Art, I focused on forced destruction, like this image of Jimi Hendrix, made with over 7,000 matches. Then I opened it up to creating art that was destroyed naturally. I looked for temporary materials, like spitting out food, using sidewalk chalk that washes away in the rain, of course, and frozen wine. The last iteration of destruction was to try to produce something that didn't actually exist in the first place. So I organized candles on a table, I lit them and then blew them out. Then I repeated this process over and over with this same set of candles. Then assembled the videos into the larger image. So this end image was never visible as a physical whole. It was destroyed before it ever existed. In the course of this Goodbye Art series, I created 23 different pieces with nothing left to display. What I thought would be the ultimate limitation really turned out to be the ultimate liberation, as each time I created, the destruction brought me back to a place of neutrality where I felt refreshed and ready to start the next project. But I will admit that didn't happen overnight. There were times my projects failed to get off the ground, or even worse, after spending tons of time on it, the end image was too embarrassing to show. But having committed to this process, I just continued on, and something really surprising happened out of it. As I destroyed each project, I was learning to let go. Let go of outcomes, let go of failures, and let go of imperfections. And in return, I found a process of creating art that was perpetual and unencumbered by result. I found myself in a state of constant creation, thinking only of what's next and coming up with more ideas than ever. When I think back to those 3 years away from art, away from my dream, just going through the motions, instead of looking for a different way to continue that dream, I just quit. I gave up. And what if I didn't embrace the shake? Because embracing the shake for me wasn't just about art and having art skills. It was about life and having life skills. Because ultimately, most of what we do takes place here, inside the box with limited resources. Learning to be creative within the confines of our limitations is the best hope we have to transform ourselves and collectively transform our world. I recently did another text art piece where I spent a month in front of a live webcam and asked people to call me and share their stories of limitations. I witnessed over 1,000 stories. Stories like being abandoned as a child, overcoming anxiety attacks, coping with stage 2 cancer, or being lost in self-identity. These stories are telling of who we are, and frankly, of how universal our limitations are, because we're really not that different, but beautifully similar. One of the most significant patterns I saw was that how we see our limitation is what transforms it. Instead of, I'm a paraplegic, I can't scuba dive, it was, I'm a paraplegic, how can I scuba dive? And for me, looking at limitations as a source of creativity changed the course of my life. Now, when I run into a barrier or I find myself completely stumped, I certainly still struggle, but I continue to show up for the process and remind myself of the possibilities, like using hundreds of real worms to make an image, using a simple push pin to tattoo a banana, or hot gluing balls of paper to the wall. Limitations may be the most unlikely of places to harness creativity, but perhaps one of the best ways to get ourselves out of ruts, rethink categories, and challenge accepted norms. And instead of telling each other to seize the day, maybe we can remind ourselves every day to seize the limitation. Thank you.